As you know, I had a chance to speak to Hannah about her experiences at Lighthouse, and after doing some research and talking to her, it seems like it made sense to talk to you about your experiences at Victory, since it was just another reiteration of the same program, right?
Exactly. They rebranded it. So do you want a little bit about the history on Victory Christian Academy?
Yes, I'd love to hear more.
Okay, in 1985, Michael Palmer, who is now deceased, so I can mention his name now, opened up Victory Christian Academy located in Ramona, California.
Okay.
And he abused girls for years, up until at that point in Ramona, California to 1991. And then social services got in there, and I had made a report. I made a report to social services. I got a hold of congressman in California during an election, and Rick Peralta with social services contacted me and did a thorough investigation. He did a 50-page deposition with me. We got it closed down in 91. It wasn't just me. It was my stories along with other survivor stories from the 80s since it opened in 85. So how could it be that other survivors from 85 had the same type of stories as I did? We didn't know each other. There wasn't any internet at that time.
Right.
We didn't communicate with each other. In fact, we were afraid to communicate with each other. We'll get into that later on in this interview.
Sure.
But we were all afraid to communicate. We were programmed not to communicate with each other. And here we were with the same stories. And these were reports, police reports, reports to social services. And yet I was shocked to find out that Michael Palmer didn't even get a slap on the wrist for child abuse. He was not prosecuted at all and got away with it. In fact, they told him, you either get a license or you have to close the school down. So he closed it down and moved it, and he was free to move it to another state and rebrand it. And he did. He rebranded it to Victory Christian Academy in Jay, Florida. He also opened up another one, Genesis by the Sea in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
So in Jay, Florida, it was open for 24 years. In Mexico, they didn't accept that kind of treatment for their children. They kicked him out. They closed it down. They found a holding cell, and it's in the newspaper, by the way.
Wow.
I'll go ahead and give you those articles if you'd like.
Yes, please.
Mexico didn't tolerate it, but yet America kept it open for an additional 24 years plus, abusing more children.
Mm-hmm. And during your stay, what year was that, and how long were you there for?
I was locked up in 1988 in July, and I left in 1989 in March.
Okay.
And I missed the beginning of my senior year.
So you were how old then?
16 when I was put in there, and 17 when I left.
That's a very formative time in your life, those teenage years. What do you feel like, how did you feel that you changed from that almost a year in there?
It was hell for me. I put it on the back burner because I needed to move forward in my life. And I know a lot of survivors do the same thing. And we were just told we were troubled kids. We were liars. It was very hard to fit back into society. And I feel that my identity was taken from me. My soul was taken from me in that place. And I had to rediscover myself. And it took some time. It was a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder. After waking up in my own bed, I would think I was locked up behind a 12-foot fence with barbed wire with no way out, with no communication. And so that took a long time to get adjusted to finally realize and come to grips that I was free. And even when you are free, you are still in your own prison. You create that prison in your mind.
Right. Can you walk me through like a typical day when you were inside the facility?
Sure. When I first got locked into this facility, I'll start from the beginning. I was on honorable mention. I really didn't think. I've heard of this place. My girlfriend Brenda was locked up into this Victory Christian Academy. She was using drugs and trying to fit in, didn't feel that she fit in. And instead of treating children that are addicted to drugs, they make things worse. And I'll get into that in a second. But she felt like she deserved this place. She was completely brainwashed. And I noticed it not being a survivor at this point. We were good friends. And I didn't think in a million years that I would be sent to this place. I was on honorable mention. I studied. I was self-sufficient. I worked. I made money on my own. I bought my own prom dress. It just didn't seem that I fit the bill to be locked up in this place. But I was sexually abused by my uncle. My parents didn't believe me. I was acting out. Who wouldn't? Acting out, but I still had good grades in school, and I didn't get in trouble with authority. I didn't commit a crime. There's no criminal record. If anything, I would be voted an outstanding student. Was I perfect? No. I was angry at my parents. But who wouldn't be acting this way if you were brave enough to tell your parents about something that happened and they didn't believe you? So it was a normal reaction to dysfunctional family. And they tricked me. I was sent there. I was behind a 12-foot fence with barbed wire. It was an old FBI facility in Ramona, California, and they converted it to a reform school. Everybody was on the same page. It was this was definitely a cult. And unfortunately, my school is not an isolated incident. There are other cults just like this across the U.S. for children. And I'm talking reform schools, wilderness camps, boot camps for kids, conversion therapies. They are cults. They are evil in this country, whether they're licensed, unlicensed, religious, non-religious, it doesn't matter. They are all using the same scare tactics. And some of them are sex trafficking. A lot of them are sex trafficking. A normal day in the school, back to your question. I went off on a different tangent, but I just wanted to give an overall view of what happened to me. It was just not normal. It was a lot of yelling, screaming, dragging girls to isolation. You're hearing hymnals being played with the piano and prayer. So you're mixing prayer time and abuse. Now you have an association for every time you hear a prayer or every time you hear a religious song, you're now associating it with child abuse. And aside from the physical, every day was torture on an emotional level and a spiritual level. We're not good enough for God. We're just untouchables. We had to put our heads down. We couldn't talk to each other. There was something called buddy, where you had to be 3 feet behind your buddy for a month, and it could go longer depending on your behavior. And we'll get into the behavior in a minute. One little mess up could land you, could be considered a behavioral problem, and it's not. It's not a behavioral problem. It's just to them and their rules. It was like being in another country with no rights. There were no rights, no phone calls, no letters. Everything was monitored. I would have had more rights in prison and in juvenile hall. And I did research on juvenile hall, by the way.
Wow. When you were first admitted, what did you do to cope and survive? Because something that Hannah mentioned was kind of trying to fake it till she made it, going along with the program just so that she wouldn't get these harsh punishments.
Sure, I could tell you my survival tactics, my coping mechanisms. By the way, I have a book called Peace is a Victory, and in my book, I held on to my 16-year-old boyfriend at the time when I was 16. So that was my hope. That was my hope. When I get out of this place, I'm going to be with him. Everything's going to be all right, or he's going to rescue me. He's a rescuer. He's going to get me out of this place. He's not going to put up with my parents locking me up behind a 12-foot fence. I envisioned him taking a drive to San Diego, checking out the facility, and making some noise. I held on to that hope. And I also went through the program as well. I just followed the rules. I learned how to not speak to anyone. First of all, you couldn't speak to anyone anyway when you first got into the program because you were of the world. So in order for them to conform you, you had to be isolated as if you weren't already when you were off buddy. But you had a buddy, which is another student in the program. You had to be 3 feet behind that student. And if you weren't, you would get punished. And those punishments would either be a demerit, they would be in isolation, and they would lock girls in isolation, by the way, for days, weeks, and months at a time, which is a small closet. And so they had the students doing all the dirty work.
Mm-hmm.
They were the ones in charge. And of course, the dorm mother was, but within the dorms, the students were doing it throughout the whole stay. I mean, they could be in the kitchen, they could be in chapel. The students were in charge of other students. So there was different rankings, like the military. So it was very militant, and I'm not trying to come down on the military, but they were taking military tactics plus abuse, child abuse.
So you talk about how like students were doing the dirty work. Do you think that was a part of that manipulation and brainwashing process?
Oh, absolutely. Because I feel that a lot of adults now that were children doing the dirty work, ranking up in status, staff and the pastor would treat them differently. They would get more benefits. They would get more privileges. Maybe they weren't berated as much. They were uplifted. They were trusted.
Mm-hmm.
And so if someone says, I had a good experience in this program and this is where I found Jesus and this is what changed my life. No, they were still being abused. They just didn't know it.
Right.
It was almost like Stockholm syndrome.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Were you able to have any sort of communication with your boyfriend or your parents?
Absolutely not. I could not speak to my boyfriend or anyone from the outside world. Immediately when I got there, that was one of the first questions, because I thought, oh, great, I can communicate on a letter. That could be cathartic for me. It could be a release. I can talk to him.
Mm-hmm.
I can vent. I can maybe get myself out of this place. Nope. I couldn't write him or any other of my friends. I could only write my parents. And it was mandatory, by the way. You had to write the very people that locked you up in this place twice a week. And if you didn't, you would get punished. Worse, they monitored it. So you couldn't say, hey, why did you lock me up in this place? You couldn't vent what you really wanted to say. If I had my druthers, I would have said, what the hell were you thinking? Locking me up in this place. I'm missing my senior year. This is horrible. Get me out of here. Get me out of here. Get me out of here. Maybe I would use a few choice of other words. Who knows? But I didn't have the freedom to do that. I couldn't be myself. I couldn't say the truth. And isn't that what you strive for as a Christian, to tell the truth? And I couldn't tell the truth. I couldn't work things out. So basically what these programs are doing is putting whatever problems you have with your kids on hold, because it's fake. The whole thing is fake. It's BS. You can't be yourself. You can't be your soul. But you have a perfect child, when you pick them up. Perfect child, a perfect Stepford child with no mind of their own. And then when the battery runs out of the remote control, because that's what we are, Stepford children, now we're walking time bombs because we just suppressed everything. That's the best way I could describe it.
Did your parents ever visit you during your stay?
For 3 months, I wasn't allowed to visit, have any visitors, any phone calls. I was completely isolated. So for the first 3 months, you weren't allowed to see your parents.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to see my parents. Of course, if I had my druthers, I would have requested other visitors, but we weren't allowed to have other visitors other than our parents. So 3 months of isolation, no visits, no phone calls. After that, you could see them, and then that was monitored. The visit was monitored, and then it was 1 month, once a month after that.
Mm-hmm.
So the first 3 months, no visitors. Then you get your visitor, and then it's once every month after that. And then you have a 7th-month visit. On your 7th-month visit, you're allowed to leave the premises. But by that time, you're so brainwashed. You don't want to run. You don't want to say anything. You get so brainwashed. I thought, oh no, this is not going to happen to me. I'm a confident person. They're not going to break me. Nope, they broke me. They probably broke me after the 3rd week.
I see. I would like to hear a bit more about the physical sort of description of the places inside. Like you talked about the barbed wire fence, and what were like the bedrooms like laid out like, and the bathrooms, and just other like places?
Sure, I'm glad you brought up the bathrooms, and that ties in with the physical abuse. There were 3 dorms. Dorm 1, Dorm 2, Dorm 3. There were brick walls in my dorm. They were blue. There were bunk beds lined up. So there were stacks of bunk beds through the dorms. And by the way, on my short film, we filmed on location. We were inside the dorms.
Oh.
We filmed the room of isolation where the actress who played me, the younger version of myself, Valerie Rose Lohman, she was actually thrown into the room of isolation, which was a real room of isolation when we filmed. As I recall, there were 2 rooms of isolation. One I didn't even know about, if you can believe that. The other one was in Dorm 3. So I believe the other one was in Dorm 2. And then the other one was in Dorm 3. I was locked up in isolation in Dorm 3. So as soon as I got there, I volunteered to go into the room of isolation, believe it or not. So here I am, just found out I'm going to be locked up in a reform school as a thank you for getting good grades and being self-sufficient. I was pissed. Mm-hmm. And so I was voicing it. You have an attitude problem, knock it off. I would hear that from staff, and then another former student that was staff at the school. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to mention any names. They threatened me with the Get Right room. It was called the Get Right room. And I knew about it because Brenda, my friend, was locked up in the same place. And she told me about the room of isolation. And I didn't care at this point. I just wanted to get away from these people. They were saying, you have a bad attitude. I deserve to be here. And I said, I had good grades in school. I was voicing it. I should not be in a reform school. I was deloused when I first got there. They didn't even check to see if I had lice. I was given medicated shampoo for lice. They were in the shower room, coming back and forth until I got out. They checked my bags. They took my things. They took my street clothes, which my street clothes weren't that bad. They were down to the floor. I mean, how much more conservative could you get? I attended a Christian school prior to this. Oh. And they took those clothes. I was given culottes. My mom bought me culottes, and my mom never takes me shopping. I would buy my own clothes. So I was really pissed. Okay, now my mom is buying clothes for me now that I'm locked up in a prison camp. And I was voicing this. So I was talking to myself, and staff overheard it and said, if you don't watch your attitude, we're going to lock you up. And you know what I said? Go ahead, lock me up. I want to get locked up because I wanted to get away from these people. I needed some time to digest what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
I needed that time, and I wanted to get away from everyone. I felt like I couldn't voice my opinions. I couldn't show any emotion.
Right.
And I felt like the Get Right room would be a perfect place for me to process.
And how long were you in there?
8 hours. They dragged me, by the way. So one of the staff took her hand and took me by the wrist and dragged me across dorms, dorm 2 to dorm 3, until I got thrown into the Get Right room. And then they shut the door and there was a peephole, and another student was designated to watch me to make sure I didn't kill myself. With what? The preaching tapes. So they had a preaching tape in the room of isolation. And because I was thinking about how do I get out of here? Maybe my boyfriend is going to come I was tuning out the preaching tapes.
Mm-hmm.
So I've learned how to tune things out very easily because I came from a dysfunctional family. So I was able to tune out those preaching tapes. And in my book, I tune out the preaching tapes, and then I tell the story of how I got into this place. And then I reflect on the love story of Drake and I. Drake is the character. And all of this was true. The love story part. I just use pseudonyms in my book.
Okay.
To protect everybody's identity.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a bit more about what the isolation room looked like? And if you had to go to the bathroom, like what did you do in that case?
At that point, I was so distraught. I didn't ask to go to the bathroom. I was just solely focused on how do I get out of here, and crying. And it was the size of a small closet, drywall. There was carpet on the floor. There was a preaching tape, and then that was it. I was on the floor.
Oh.
There was no chair. There was no bed. There was nothing. I was on the floor. But I'm almost 50, and I don't mind squatting on the floor. You know what I'm saying? I didn't mind that. And when you're so distraught, you just don't give a rat's you know what.
Yeah.
And I was just upset. And the way I got out of it is because I wanted to stay in there. I was stubborn. And I didn't realize that they would keep girls in there for days, weeks, and months at a time. I had no clue. And I had no idea what time it was. I kept seeing the student through the peephole checking up on me. I asked for Kleenex. No one was giving me any Kleenex. I was using my culottes to wipe my snot off. I was told that if you were asked to go to the bathroom when you're in the Get Right room, you would get punished. I just never came across that because I was so distraught. I didn't ask to use the restroom. I just asked for a Kleenex, and I wasn't getting that.
Mm-hmm.
But back to the bathrooms, if you were on your bunk, I'm fast forwarding from the Get Right room. If you were on your bunk at night and you asked to go to the bathroom, they had laser beams. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Tron. It's before your time. It was back in the 80s. They had the laser beams going across. It looked like that. And if you cross, it would crisscross and it would light up like a laser beams going across the room at night. Mm-hmm. And if you got off your bunk bed, the alarm would go off. Like I'm talking high pitched, screeching. Everybody would know you were off your bunk. He didn't want anybody running from this place. There was no way out. So you couldn't just go to the bathroom when you wanted. You were not free. You had to ask permission to go to the bathroom, and then you would get punished to go to the bathroom. 500 lines. I will not ask my buddy in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. Or it could be worse. It could be longer than that. 500 times. A child should not be punished for asking to go to the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be a demerit, or it could be other punishments.
And by 500 lines, just to clarify, you mean like just writing it in your notebook? Like
yes.
500 times?
Writing it and turning it in. And it has to be done by 24 hours. Or it could double, triple, quadruple, and you get the idea.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And you can get a demerit for anything. going to the bathroom. If you were on separation with another student, I'll give you an example. I was put on separation because once I finally got off buddy for 1 month, and it could be longer depending on your behavior. God forbid if you say the word pants, you could be on buddy for 2 months, 3 months, or say Madonna or Prince. I'm talking 80s here.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't say anything that was pertaining to the world.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty much the God, the Bible, and if you talked about the movies or talking about going to the movies with your family, I mean, this place was nuts.
What's with the word pants? Like, why was that considered bad?
So in Deuteronomy, they're taking verses and twisting it around to their liking. It says a man should wear men's apparel and women should wear women's apparel. And this is how they got pants, that you couldn't wear women should not wear pants. So we had to wear culottes or a skirt. And a skirt or dress would have to go down pretty much past your knees, almost to your ankles.
Mm-hmm.
Just very conservative. If you dressed a certain way, it was almost like free range for a man to rape a woman. So everything that you would learn through a rape counselor just went right out the window. It was how you dressed, your makeup, your demeanor. It's your fault. Everything's your fault. If you get raped, it's your fault because a woman is a temptress. This is their mindset. So in another facility that was a sister program, New Bethany, they were raping girls. They were sodomizing them. They were sex trafficking them, boys too, in the boys' home as well. And then they would, and picture that, picture no way out. There's a fence, you're trapped, and then they're backing it up with scripture to justify it. That's disgusting. They're backing it up. So it's bad enough you get raped, right? And then they're backing it up with the Bible. How screwed up is that? Christians should be livid at this.
Absolutely. And I'm wondering if you were forced or pressured to talk about your sexual assault, and did they victim blame you too?
They did. They victim blamed me when a counselor, she wasn't a counselor, she was acting as if she was going to give me therapy, a staff member, brought me into her office when I had told them, because she asked me, why do you think you're here? Mm-hmm. And I said, because I was raped by my uncle. My parents didn't believe me. I acted out and they didn't like it. And that's how I ended up getting here. And then it got to the point where she blamed me, brought verses out from the Bible, justified it, how it was my fault and I was the temptress. She had me praying to God to ask God to forgive me.
Mm.
It was just unbelievable. I was seeing a rape counselor. I was sneaking it behind my parents' back. Can you imagine that? It's unbelievable. As an adult now, I just think that's just horrible that a child would have to sneak counseling. They wanted my parents' permission. That was the whole problem. At that point, I won't say what the organization was, but they demanded that I would get permission from my parents, and that's how the whole thing started. Then my boyfriend confronted my parents because he really wanted me to get counseling, which was the mature thing to do. And then once that happened, all hell broke loose. So it was prove it. Why are you just coming to us now? Well, because I was afraid to tell you because of this, because I knew this would happen. That's why I'm just coming to you now. And it wasn't me. It wasn't me who confronted my parents. It was my boyfriend because he wanted help. I don't blame him for it. He was very mature as a 16, 17-year-old to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, back to the counseling, they blamed me. They victim blamed me to the point where I ended up praying to God because I had no other recourse. Mm-hmm. And asking God to forgive me for my sins of being sexually abused by my uncle.
That's just insane. And even though you weren't allowed to talk to other girls during your time there, what were your relationships like with them? Were there any friendships built, or was it a lot of mistrust and just every girl for themselves?
That's a good question. You're asking really good questions. Absolutely not. After getting close with one person after Buddy, I said to another student, I said, we had to memorize Bible verses and we had to memorize it by a certain time. And I have a good memory.
Mm-hmm.
And this other student was struggling. And I thought, okay, well, this could brush me up and I could be helping someone else at the same token. We're not allowed to talk about anything of the world. We can only talk about God and the Bible. Well, what could go wrong? We're memorizing verses. And I attended a Christian school. This would be known as something good. That's two students are collaborating together and studying together. How wonderful is that, right? No, not in this place. We were studying, we were by our bunks, we were going back and forth. Two helpers, which were students, were talking to each other, and I don't blame the helpers. This is how we were conditioned. Mm-hmm. I don't blame helpers at all for any of it, because it was all part of the brainwashing and it was all part of the cult. They were collaborating together and saying, they're getting too close. They're clicking. We have to separate them. They have to be on separation. They're spending too much time together. Well, if you listen to us, we're talking about verses and reciting them. We're not even talking about the outside world. We were on separation, which means we had to be a certain feet apart from each other. And if let's say we were in the same bathroom with each other, we would get a demerit, even if it was an accident. Let's say I didn't know she was in the stall and I'm in the bathroom washing my hands and a helper sees it, which is, again, I'm going to reiterate this so many times, another student, I would get a demerit or punished for it.
What would those demerits look like?
They could be very long. They could be short. They could be very long. Most of the time, they were very long. I will not be in the bathroom at the same time as the person I'm on separation with.
Okay.
Whatever. That will make up whatever it is that I made a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll come up with something. I mean, can you imagine that 500 times? Can you imagine that 1,000 times? Can you imagine double, tripling, quadrupling? And then if you can't get your stuff together, you're locked up in isolation for days, weeks, and months at a time. And I'm so sorry. My apologies.
No, it's okay. Did you experience any physical punishments or see other girls who had to endure that?
Absolutely. I've seen girls dragged to the Get Right room. And I saw a student in the Get Right room for what I thought was a week, but it was really days, weeks, and months at a time. Her hair was matted. She looked like she wasn't showering. Mm-hmm. And they treated her like an animal. They also did this. We were in line to get our food, and everything was militant lines. Mm-hmm. Everything was just so structured. We were in line, and I guess she was more than 3 feet away from her buddy. And I saw a rope attached to her helper and to the student. And Brother Palmer, Michael Palmer, the preacher, because he's deceased, I could say his name, I will say it countless times, said the following: if you are more than 3 feet apart from your buddy, this is what happens. He was using her as an example. And if the rope doesn't work, I'll put a dog leash on you. I'll put you on a dog leash. What's the difference? Even without the visible rope or dog leash, we're still a dog. We're still behind our buddy. Mm-hmm. I saw a girl get duct tape. This is in my short film. She was tied to a chair. This is when I first arrived at Victory. There was something called rap sessions, and they were every Wednesday. And it's when other girls tear other girls down in the name of God. And then it is all orchestrated by staff member. I didn't know it was orchestrated by the staff member when I first got there. I saw a girl duct taped to a chair, and her hands were behind her back. They were handcuffed. There was duct tape over her mouth. There was duct tape over her ankles, and there were Bibles all around, and they were tormenting her in the name of God. And I thought, when is the staff going to get here to help her? But the staff was behind it, and she comes out, and then she tells all the girls to start saying something derogatory about her in the name of God. Just, she didn't say it like that, but she said, okay, why is this girl not right with God? And they would go down the list of all the things that they thought was wrong. Her attitude. But how could you have a good attitude when you're locked up in this hellhole? How could you be happy about it?
Mm-hmm.
It was just sad because I couldn't do anything about it. I was just trapped and I couldn't help her. And that was just, I know a lot of students feel the same way, that we want to do something about it, but we were afraid for our own lives and our own safety and our survival. So we just didn't say anything.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's terrible. And this happened every week, you said, right? So it was like a normal occurrence.
A normal occurrence. There was one girl that tried to kill herself, and we were in chapel, and they brought her out. She was new, and of course she wasn't happy. And I think she tried to kill herself with a bobby pin, and she tried to slit her wrist with a bobby pin.
Mm-hmm.
And they brought her in handcuffed, and she was screaming in chapel saying, the handcuffs hurt. Can you take them off, please? She was begging them to take them off, and they wouldn't. And instead of helping or giving someone positive reinforcement or just making them feel better about themselves, you don't want to belittle or berate or humiliate someone who just tried to kill themselves. You want to help them. That is the norm, but not in this place. Can you imagine? You're in chapel. You're in the house of God, so to speak. This was the house of Satan, quite frankly. This was not of God. This was evil. Can you imagine being in the so-called house of God and then hearing the screaming and a preacher belittling a student that just tried to kill herself? It was just awful. But that was daily spiritual torture.
Mm-hmm.
I was spiritually tortured to the point where I was a Christian before I went into this place. Mm-hmm. I would hug my girlfriend Brenda. We would pray together. I was very confident in my relationship with God that mm-hmm. I would share it with other people. And I was very respected in my Christian school by faculty and staff. I went to youth group twice a week. I went to church. And when I got out of this place, I did not feel like a Christian at all. This preacher made me feel like I was an untouchable, not only to society, but to God. I lost my faith in humanity. I kept my spirituality because I don't blame God for people's behavior, because we have a choice. We have free will. But I definitely blame humans. I think humans can be very evil. And this place is pretty evil. I believe there's light, don't get me wrong. But I feel like it's a spiritual battle.
Mm-hmm. And when you left the program, what was the healing process like for you? And how long did it take for you until you wanted to tell your story, until you were able to maybe reconnect with other survivors?
Oh, wow. When I left the program, I was a different person. I was very submissive. Mm-hmm. I wasn't like that before the program. I was full of rage. Mm-hmm. There was rage, a lot of rage. I was angry at my parents for locking me up in there.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a voice for 8 months. I had to hold it in. I didn't have an identity. I was depressed. I didn't want to study anymore. The girl that had 5 or 6 books carrying them to home, I didn't care. I didn't care about if I failed all my classes. I didn't care about studying, and it wasn't to get back at anybody. It wasn't to get back at anybody. It was, I just felt so defeated at that point. I was at a all-time low. It was horrible getting up in the morning to take a shower. Just everything was in slow motion.
Mm-hmm.
To adjust, trying to adjust to get back into society. And I went to a public school after that. They wouldn't accept me into the private school because there were a lot of students that were coming from Victory Christian Academy. And by the way, the school that I attended prior was called Cornerstone Christian School in Camarillo, which was wonderful, by the way. And that's where I was well respected at. They had a stipulation. They had a meeting with my parents. We want Jeneen to come back. She was an excellent student, but our stipulation is that she needs counseling, because they heard about what happened to us in this lockdown facility, because other girls were coming from that, telling the school about what was going on. So they knew I was being abused, and they knew I was abused prior. And they wanted me to get counseling, which was good. That was a good thing. My parents did not want it. They did not want me to get counseling. And my father holds up the Bible and said, "This is all Jeneen needs."
Mm.
And they said, "Well, we can't accept her." And he said, "Fine, we'll take her out." And I ended up going back to Newbury Park High School, and I graduated from Newbury Park High School, but I barely did. And you know about the credits, how you just don't get any credit for being at Victory Christian Academy.
Uh-huh.
It's a joke. It's a joke. The educational system is a joke. I was doing 5th-grade work. I was happy about it because at that point I was so distraught I couldn't focus.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was used to memorizing The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe and Algebra 2 and studying Spanish and memorizing, and I couldn't do that in there. So it was actually a blessing, but because I was being abused, but this should not happen at all to students. They shouldn't be in an environment where you're happy about 5th-grade work because you're being abused.
Yeah.
That shouldn't even be a thought process, but it was. And I barely graduated from Newbury Park. I had to take the GED test to pass, and I passed it, and I was able to graduate. But I was one of the fortunate ones, because most of these girls and boys that survive these programs, it's a joke. They're barely making it. They're not accredited.
After you left, did you tell your parents about what you experienced? Did they ask?
They never asked. They never asked what happened. But one day, I was pretty much on my way out at that point. I was 17, I graduated, and I said, "You don't even know what they did to me in that place." And I was about to tell him, and he said, "Do you always believe your own lies?" Because remember, they didn't believe me about the sexual abuse.
Mm.
So now I'm lying about this. And so I said to him, "You know what? You don't deserve to know what happened to me. You don't deserve any of it." And I packed all my things in a garbage bag, a trash bag, whatever it was I had. And my girlfriend, Kara Pazarina, I confided in her about what happened to me, and we became really good friends. And her family took me into her home I was so lucky. I was so lucky that they took me in, and they had a full family. They had all their bedrooms were full. So I slept on the floor at Kara's house in a sleeping bag, but I was happy. I was happy. I had a family that took me in. They didn't charge me any rent. They helped me get on my feet. They taught me how to drive. They taught me how to shop for myself. It was like a crash course in 6 months. And they even offered to rent the room from them after I got a job. But I ended up being on my own. I wanted to be on my own. But they were just a stepping stone for me to get to the next level. And I'm so grateful to them. And I've been an independent woman ever since that. I got a job at Henson Aviation. After that, I used that as a stepping stone to get a job that required a bachelor's degree at Pepperdine University. I worked at Pepperdine University for quite some time. The undergraduate business division, the Grazio Dio School of Business, and Hunsinger Academic Center. I was troubleshooting with faculty and staff way back yonder in the early 90s. So I feel like I've been very blessed in a lot of ways, and people have helped me. I mean, what are the odds of me getting a job at a prestigious university, not having a bachelor's degree?
I'm glad that you were able to make it out, and sounds like a lot of your own storytelling now and your activism is a big part of your healing journey.
Definitely is definitely a big part of my healing journey. Writing a book was, definitely cathartic for me. It was bringing up a lot of PTSD. I'm not going to lie, but it needed to be told. I wanted to touch base on something else that's pretty important. I always talk about myself being a mindless droid, and I used to be very emotional before this place. And yes, I got emotional on the show, but it takes a certain topic or a certain thing to set me off. But usually I can talk about the most tragic things and not have any emotion. And it is due to Victory Christian Academy. They trained us not to have any emotion. So if I started crying about being locked up, if girls started crying about being locked up, you were thrown in isolation for crying, or berated, or punished in some way.
So that's like another long-term effect.
Yes, that was the long-term effect on me, I feel.
At what point did you decide to write your book or share your story?
Sure, I wanted to do it in the early 90s, but there was a sign that I got. I think it was too close to when I was abused, and I was going to write about it. I put it on hold. I stopped. I didn't do it. And then Michelle Erickson, who wrote the book Reform at Victory, I don't know if you're familiar with it. She's the only other author that wrote about Victory Christian Academy.
Mm-hmm.
And she wrote a book. I read it. We were communicating with each other. I bonded with her. She was the only survivor that I was in touch with at that point. And she was an atheist, so it was a little bit easier because of the fact that I was afraid to be in contact with somebody who was still brainwashed and believed that this was the best thing that God ever did. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear God mixed in with this child abuse. I didn't want to hear this was the best thing that ever happened to me. I was so afraid of that in the name of God. I just couldn't take it. So Michelle was actually the best person to talk to at first. And she passed away. She overdosed. She killed herself. And I know she was struggling with PTSD. She was struggling with Victory Christian Academy. And I was devastated when she passed away, just devastated. And I ended up reaching out to survivors of institutional abuse. Sia, Jody Hobbs. And from there, that's when I got in touch with all the survivors. It was survivors of institutional abuse. And it was almost like the catalyst to get me to that level, because I really refused to speak with anybody else. I didn't feel comfortable with anyone else. But that's changed.
Yeah. During this time, were you seeking any professional help being in therapy?
That's a good question. I ended up contacting RASAC, rape and sexual abuse, and I found a counselor that would provide therapy for me twice a week on a sliding scale. So I ended up paying for therapy, but on a sliding scale, so it worked out for me.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yes, I think we covered a lot. So I guess my last question would be, a lot of these schools are still open and still running, although some places have gotten lawsuits and shut down. What do you think it will take for more awareness or more just systemic change so that either these places are regulated or that they're completely shut down?
That's a good question. I feel like this is a movement that's happening right now. Paris Hilton just came out.
I saw that.
She was brave enough to tell her story, and I'm very proud of her for doing that. There are others that have come out. Kat Von D has come out and told her story. Carolyn Burt, I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's on my website. She came out and told her story about what happened to her in a wilderness camp. But I really feel that the police, social services, FBI are not doing anything. Politicians are not doing anything. Kudos to Sarah Gelser. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her in Oregon. She is making a difference. She has a perfect model in Oregon, and it should be on a federal level.
Okay.
I feel like she's a mover and a shaker politically.
Okay.
There was a bill that we were trying to pass in 2010. It was introduced by George Miller, and it was reintroduced by Adam Schiff. It is currently dead in the water, but I believe that things are going to start happening. It's people. It's the people. The people are going to make the changes, because I feel that the people are the fire under the politicians' butts to get things done. Sarah Gelser is different because she had a personal experience to pull from, and that's why I believe she's a mover and a shaker. But we need some fire going on, because nothing is being done. And worse, no one's being prosecuted. Okay, yippee, these places are being shut down. I'll give you an example. Alexandra Zayas, who is a journalist from the Tampa Bay Times, did a thorough report on the Lighthouse and Victory Christian Academy and Genesis by the Sea. And that was enough to have parents pull their kids out that went belly up, and no one was prosecuted. So great, it closed down. It was open for 24 plus years. So Michael Palmer, closed it down in Ramona, California, and he was able to run Victory Christian Academy, which rebranded to Lighthouse, for 24 plus years, abusing more girls for that long of time. Mexico didn't tolerate it, but here in America, we tolerate child abuse, no problem. Why? It's a $1 billion industry. It's a money-making propaganda. So as long as money's behind it, the sky's the limit in this country. It's corrupt. And I feel like, quite frankly, I don't believe that politicians are going to do anything until the people start putting the fire under their butts. Look what happened with Missouri. They brought it to their attention, and they did something about it. So kudos to Missouri for doing something about it. Survivors were just giving their testimonies to legislation in Missouri. So proud of them for doing that and creating that fire because things are getting done in that state. But this is a federal emergency. This is an emergency. Kids should not be in isolation right now as we speak. They should not be sex trafficked. There's sex trafficking going on. No one cares, it seems.
Yeah, I think that um, people like you and people like Hannah are making some waves. Like, I was kind of put onto the troubled teen industry through Paris Hilton's online activism is making a difference. I've seen a lot of like TikTok videos, like survivors who are speaking out, and it seems like those videos are getting a lot of hits, and people are becoming more aware. Because even in my class, since I'm doing this story, I talked to my classmates about what I'm writing about, and some of them had heard vaguely about the industry, but most were very shocked. They didn't know that the kinds of abuses that happen and that are happening legally too, you know. So I'm hoping that things will change, and I think the conversation just needs to continue.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for taking your time to do this. And what is the name of it? Is it UCI?
Yeah, I'm a student at UC Irvine. So I'm in the literary journalism department, and this is for one of our advanced workshops.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. Thank you so much for spreading the awareness. And did you find Hannah on TikTok, or how did you
I
stumble?
did. I was just looking through the Breaking Code Silence hashtag, and she was one of the top users
Oh,
on that
awesome.
platform.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time and being that you're not a survivor yourself of one of these troubled teen programs. It's really nice to know that someone who hasn't experienced this is interested in doing a thorough interview with someone who has been through it. So I applaud you for that and keep spreading it around to people that don't know. Because a lot of survivors are spreading it around, but it's within the survival community. I want people to hear about it that has never heard about these places. A lot of people don't know these places exist.
Yeah, because they're so hidden, and there's so much. I feel like survivors also carry some shame and that as part of the PTSD. So there is that silence, but I hope things start changing, and I totally agree that there needs to be a bigger awareness and national eyes looking at this.
I agree with you. Thank you so much for taking your time to do this. I appreciate it. Do you have any other questions or?
I think that's about it. Thank you so much for opening up to me. I know this can be like a difficult conversation, but I really appreciate your transparency.
Oh, thank you. And what I'll do is I'll send you one of my raw testimonies to you, if that
Okay.
helps. And I'll share my YouTube channel with you and any other information that you need because I interview survivors across the US on my YouTube channel called Pieces of Victory.
Great. Wonderful.
I'll go ahead and shoot that over to you real soon. I would say within an hour. I have to get ready for my client, but yes, I can shoot that over to you soon.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, honey. Have a good night.
Thanks, you too. Bye.
Bye.